Hey everybody, welcome back to Moto Talk with Steve and Kim. I'm Steve and that's Kim over there. He's at a remote location today. Glad you're able to get on here and meet up with us.
Yeah, thanks. I'm at everybody on this call's nation's capital, Washington D.C. and
That's awesome.
The
Visiting
cherry
your daughter.
The cherry blossoms are in bloom. They're beautiful. We got to walk. Or we actually took scooters down to the mall and saw all that. It's pretty crowded, which is good to see. It was a beautiful day. And then today I went to Washington's home, Mount Vernon. That was super cool. And I have the best hostess in the world, my daughter Erin, who lives here in Lorton, Virginia.
Of course. Yeah, we'll have to get out that way one of these days, and maybe she can host the Hoy Vintage Show right there with all of us. That would be kind of cool.
To do that, wouldn't you, Aaron?
That would be neat. Have the St. Bernards right next to us, guarding us. You know,
yeah,
we're so famous with all of our one follower that's watching us right now. Oh man!
Hi, Greg McKenzie.
Yeah, is Greg there?
No, I don't know. I'm just saying he's.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't see Greg on there yet. Hey, okay, so there'll be some rides coming up here this summer. We've got the whole summer ahead of us, and I'm sure there'll be some nice rides coming up, mostly for benefit rides. Those are the ones that we'll probably be announcing. Hey, we got the nice AGV helmet there. Kim's been out riding. Where were you today, Kim? Want me to show you that picture?
Yeah, there you go.
Let's pull that picture up here. You can talk about that.
Yeah, so that picture right there is me riding Erin's motorcycle, Molly. She's an FZ600, which is a terrific one I got from Bill Yarian. If he's on here, thanks again, Bill. That's the Potomac River that everybody's heard of, and the front wheel of the Yamaha is in it. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. Yeah, it wasn't too hard. It was on a boat ramp, so I didn't run any risk of going all the way in. But it sure is fun. Again, that bike is one that Aaron uses here in DC, and it is the Swiss Army knife of motorcycles. If you've never been on an FZ, you should try it because they have great power bands. They're easy to ride. They're very forgiving bikes in a number of ways. We have a customer that has two of them with over 100,000 miles on them, so they've proven their way there as well. So it's a good thing to consider if you've not been on one.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Hey, so just a little bit of moto news here, other than the rides that might come up, and we'll post those later. Ducati has a recall on a couple models of their or a model of their Multistrada V4. Something about the valve gears, or not the valve gears, but the cam chain gear thing. Let me get this picture off of here real quick.
I can tell you Lisa Galbraith is going to be really happy to hear that.
I'm sure she's on top of it, though. She's probably already knows about that, and she probably has the model that doesn't even need it. So
yeah, well, let's hope that's true. She had such a bad experience the last time.
Hey, John Hill, how you doing?
Hi, John.
Yeah, so anyway, if you own a Multistrada, I only know one person, and that's Lisa.
My brother.
You want to get that checked out. Hey, Bill. There's Bill Yarian.
Hi, Bill.
He was just in the other day and got some tires done. Let's see. Shout out to some local Brownsburg shops. But first of all, Speedway AMCA show in Gas City. There were some comments on that, and Nick Averett reached out to me and said, "Hey, if anybody's got if anybody wants any info about the Gas City show there, to send him a message." Nick Averett of LA Cycles in Whitestown. Today I'm shouting out local Moto Brownsburg shops, and the first one is Performance Power Sports, Brownsburg, Indiana. Those guys are great. They can supply you with all of your power sport needs: chains, sprockets, grips, bars, apparel for dirt riding, all that kind of stuff. Tracy at Little Bikes, he's here in Brownsburg. Lil, L-I-L Bikes, and he restores CT70s, Z50s, and I think he's doing like an MT90. Does that make sense?
Yep.
What were those little MTs? BMF Twins, Bear over at BMF Twins, used to be called Dell's. Bear bought that out, and he's doing all V Twins He's very good at all V twins and extremely good at the Harleys and the Indians. And then we have Ray Hall, Ducati, Indianapolis, but it's in Brownsburg. So I don't know how that works out, but I think they needed to call it that. And then their location is here in Brownsburg on Moto Row or whatever that is over off of Northfield Drive.
It's directly across the street from John Force Racing.
Yeah, I thought it was across the street to the south-ish, I think. Anyway, hey, Roger Swartout. How you doing today? All right, we're getting some viewers on there now. Hey, I was joking around with Bonnie today about our tens of followers on here, not tens of thousands or hundreds, but just tens. That she was giving me a hard time. She was out picking sticks up, and she's like, "Aren't you going to help me pick some sticks up?" And I knew she was doing it because she likes to work out. So I said, "Yeah, I'll pick a stick up."
Yeah, right.
Threw it in the pile, and then I got my show. I got to do the show. Bill Yarian, my V-Strom is a V-twin. Hey, yeah, there you go.
Indeed.
I don't know that Bear wants to really work on the V-Stroms, though. All right, all the shout outs are done. Hey, and of course, I've got to shout this one out. Your premier full service moto shop in the tri-state area, Hoy Vintage Cycles, of course. But we're a little biased. www.hoyvc.com. That's where you can learn about our shop. And so we're going to do some questions today. If you are viewing live and you want to ask a moto question, one of us will probably know it. And if not, we will just fake it.
Yeah,
so, right. All right. First one of the day. Linda Parks. When slowing down on my bike, my front handlebars start to wobble back and forth. What causes this? I'll let you answer that one, Kim.
Yeah, so there's about a dozen things off the top of my head that could be causing that. The one that first comes to mind is tire inflation. That'll certainly do it. What happens is when you slow down, all the weight transfers to the front of the bike and causes a little bit of extra pressure on how the front and rear wheel relate. And when that happens, if you get on the brakes, it can make it worse. So you have to be careful to make sure not only are your tire pressures correct, but then you can look a little deeper if it persists after you do your tire pressure adjustments and make sure that you have steering head bearings are in good shape, that the axle's good and tight, that your forks are in decent nick. If they're not, it can cause that kind of problem. The other thing that's probably a little less obvious is if your bike's been modified, and there's so many of these out there, if somebody's lowered the suspension or if someone's put different tires than were designed for the bike on the thing, it'll cause potentially that kind of a thing. And there's probably not much worse than a wobble in the front end of a bike when you least expect it. You certainly don't want to have to wrestle a bike to the ground or have it wrestle you to the ground under those circumstances. So if you're having that problem, I would say if you ride regularly and it's happening to you, don't delay. Get it in front of somebody that can diagnose it and fix it for you because you do not want that to get worse.
Right. Yeah, and what I found too is I end up getting to test ride a lot of these bikes that we work on at the shop, and many of them it is just a bad tire or a out of balanced wheel. So I saw Roger mention that down there at the bottom, bad front tire. Yeah. There's many times where a new tire has fixed that issue. A lot of times you'll go down the road, and as you're decelling, it may not wobble when you're coasting, but as you're decelling, as the engine's giving braking power, if you just take one hand off and your other hand is on, you'll start to feel it. And then if you take both hands off, and I don't recommend this, but I do this sometimes to test how true a bike is rolling down the road, that's when the death wobble can really get out of control. And then as soon as you put your hands on it, it goes right away. Now, what about rake? How much is that? Does that affect it?
It has a very significant effect on it because rake and trail determines how the motorcycle's stability is going down the street. And if it's not correct, or for some reason the bike itself is interrupting the way it's naturally supposed to be spec'd out, it'll cause that problem. Loose steering head bearings will cause the rake to increase and decrease depending upon whether you're on or off the brakes. If you've got an unusual front tire size based upon the way the bike was built, you can have that problem. There were a lot of people that in the 80s and 90s decided to go to a smaller front wheel like a super motard bike might have compared to the bike behind Steve's got a 21-inch front wheel. if you put even a 17 on that bike and try to ride it that way, it so dramatically reduces the trail that it makes it get a little bit too quick in its steering, and you have to adjust it. But yeah, rake very definitely will affect it. And it's an extreme example, but if you look at a chopper that has a proper rake in the steering neck and the front end's way out in front of the bike, that essentially is like extra caster that causes the bike to want to continue to go straight no matter what. And the bikes that are steeper, like a mini bike, if you looked at it from the side, the forks go almost straight up and down, and those are much more quicker to steer, but they're less stable. So it's something in the middle is what you're trying to achieve. But you also have to think about when you're sitting on the bike, you can be sitting in any number of places. If you're sitting to the rear, it's going to tend to take a little bit of weight off the front end, make it less sensitive. And when you see like MotoGP riders put their foot out, they used to think that the reason they did that was to take up wind, and that is one reason. The other reason is that it transfers weight to the inside of the bike when they're getting ready to make a turn. So the weight that you have on your foot pegs, the weight that you have on the front or the rear of the bike can affect that very dramatically. So I've said this before, and when we were talking about modified bikes a couple weeks ago, the idea that you can change the forks and the steering angles, that's all interesting and it looks great sometimes, or maybe you achieve the look you're looking for, but it may cause the motorcycle to be less stable and therefore less safe.
Right. Yep. I'm changing your name on there.
From Aaron? I can be Aaron today. It's okay.
From Aaron to Kim. Actually, I have Kin.
Yeah, well, I can be that.
There we go. All right. Anyway, yeah. So another thing that I found, not just with the death wobble, and that is when you have a lot of these heavy bikes that go straight all the time, they'll end up getting a detent in the steering bearings, and they'll want to stick in that middle spot. So like, when you're on a bicycle back when you were a kid or whatever, I still do it, but you take your hands off the bike and you can steer it around with just your weight. If it gets a bad enough detent, you can't even do that with the bike, and that can be pretty dangerous. So that's another reason to check the steering bearings.
If you've never had this experience, I don't recommend you do this as an experiment, but if you tighten the steering head bearings too tight, and we've had that, it makes a motorcycle almost unrideable.
It's very crazy.
The bike tries to follow the front wheel at all times when it's in the right situation. But if you mess around with it, it causes a big problem. And that's really, really important. So it looks like Dusty's got a comment here.
Good idea, right. Dusty.
When looks surpass geometry, best to push it than ride it. Boy, that's absolutely true. But it does have to be properly engineered. The person who's putting it together has to understand the relationship between where the axles are and where the rake and trail is adjusted to. And that has a lot to do with the length of the forks, the size of the wheel, the angle of the steering head, all of that. There's some imaginary lines you can draw to come to the conclusion of where it should be. But Dusty's right. If it's not properly engineered, it's dangerous.
All right. Question number 2 that we got today, George Jeffers. What fixes, I think he meant what fixes squeaky brakes? What fixes squeaky brakes? Well, typically squeaky brakes are when you're braking and the brake pads start a vibration, and they vibrate at a certain frequency that makes it sound like it's a squeak. And a lot of times people think it's the actual pads themselves, when a lot of times it's not. And I don't know if you've ever changed the brake pads on a car, but when you get the pads, they also give you a little packet of grease. And as you mentioned earlier, talking to you, it needs to be a special sort of grease that you put on the back of the pads, the metal part of the pads. And obviously you're not going to do it very too generously or too liberally to end up getting any grease on your actual pads. That's one fix that I have found that helps squeaky brakes. I'll let you.
Some bikes by design, bikes that use Brembo calipers, for example, and there are others too, and most modern bikes have these, but they have little buffer springs that are made out of stainless steel that hold the pads in place. And they're not really there to physically hold the pad in place. They're there to dampen any vibrations that come from what causes what Steve's talking about, which is that vibration between the rotor and the pad itself. And that grease, the reason it has to be the right kind of grease is that it can't get hot and runny, because if it does that, it winds up
then
on
it'll go all over and
big
end
problem.
up getting in the pads and the
Right.
rotor.
So you can't really even use wheel bearing grease. It's not a good idea. And some of the brake manufacturers will also send you a little tube of what amounts to silicone, where you can put a little smear on the back of the disc, or not the disc, on the back of the pad, and it'll help. But yeah, it's really important though for squeaky brakes to make sure that brakes are clean and functional, because if there's anything causing the puck inside the caliper to be hesitant, like if it's got any corrosion on it or something that's preventing it from moving back and forth readily, that'll cause it. If the brake pads themselves are worn in an odd direction, or if you try to put a new brake pad sometimes on a rotor that's been worn through by a brake pad that got way too thin, you'll find that it doesn't wear in very well, and you have really terrible brakes, and they'll be noisy as well.
Right. All right. Question 3 that we got was Tony Campos. What is a false neutral? Now, this is something that I've not seen in hardly any bikes except for my Honda Dream, which is an old bike, and it would lock into a false neutral as I come to a stop, and I would want to click back up into first gear. And I found that if I did not gear down all the way down to first gear, that eventually it would go into like a false neutral between like a second and third or something weird, and almost kind of lock into place, and not want to go anywhere. And then I got to looking. I know we've talked about this before, but this has happened a couple times on to people in racing. So there may be some guys on here like Roger Swartout or some experienced rider racers that have some knowledge on this false neutral. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on it other than what I'm able to look up.
Yeah, I think the big problem with the false neutral is the idea that you expect to get a gear, and the expected reaction of being in gear is whether it's speeding up, slowing down, the bike's reacting to what you're trying to accomplish. And if you find yourself between gears, which is, in my opinion, what a false neutral really is, it's not where you would expect neutral to be. You might be shifting between third and fourth and wind up in a neutral.
And it happens to find it there.
Yeah, and when that happens, it's usually, like Steve said, it's less common on modern gearboxes. It is common on bikes that have what I'll call a more agricultural shifting, like BMWs have. Some BMWs, not all of them, the modern ones are great, but some of the older BMWs have a very, very mechanical feeling gearbox. And because of that, it's pretty easy to find or even put it yourself in a false neutral. And you don't really want to do that, particularly on a motorcycle that has a shaft drive. It'll have an odd reaction when you get it in the gear that you're trying to go. And the other thing that's not intuitive about it is when you get into a false neutral, not every time, but almost every time you get into one, if you're on an old bike or a bike that has a tendency to do it, the way out of it is to go up, not down. Like if you're in between third and fourth, you should try to go to fourth before you try to go back down to third. Because if you try to do it that way, it doesn't always want to go, because that lower gear is spinning faster than the higher gear. Even if it's only a little bit, it's marginal and make you have a harder time getting that resolved.
Yeah, if you want to go look it up, Isle of Man, Guy Martin. I think he actually had an accident due to a false neutral, and there's some reading out there that talks about it and explains a little bit of what happened and how it can cause you to wreck. But I mean, those guys are pushing the limits. Doing that race
mildly. I mean, people like Guy Martin, the guys that ride the Isle of Man regularly, they're gods on motorcycles. They're fearless. They have absolutely, there's a famous quote by Guy Martin where he says, "When I'm out there and I'm going 200 miles an hour, there's a green blur and there's a gray blur. I try to keep it on the gray part." And that's basically how it looks from the other side.
I just prefer no blur.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so number 4, I ordered grips for my Harley, and they don't fit or work, and now I'm stuck with grips that don't work on this bike.
Yeah. So one thing that
I'll let you
people
talk
don't
about
really
that one.
one thing that people don't really think about is that the bars on so many motorcycles, especially now if you compare the whole range of bikes available from old bikes to new bikes, there are handlebars of so many different sizes you can't possibly imagine it. And most motorcycles, especially Japanese bikes from the 60s and 70s, had 7/8
7
inch
eighths.
bars. And that was a pretty common thing. That meant that the switches mounted on there on 7/8 bars, and the grip was a predictable size on each side, whether it's the throttle side or the bar side. But then we started getting into different kinds of bars. And the bike, again, behind Steve, has what would be considered a fat bar. It has 1.125 in the middle and 7/8 at the far ends. But
Right.
when you get into Harley Davidsons, some of those, most of them from the factory, going back a pretty good distance, were 1 inch to begin with on both sides. And they had a unique throttle size because of it. It almost always demanded that you use a Harley throttle grip because there was really no good replacements available. There are now, there's a million different choices. But even then, some of the aftermarket bars available for Harleys today are even bigger than that. They're 1.125 clear out at the handlebar end, and
Right.
that becomes a problem. But as Steve was talking earlier in the shop, and people like Dusty Pine, Nick Averitt will know this backward and forward. Some of the modern Harleys have such unique components in the switch gear and the operating mechanisms for the cruise control and the throttle itself that if you don't have compatible components, you can't use replacement parts. You have
Yeah,
to
on a
use
lot of
something
those.
specifically made for that.
Yeah, a lot of those you don't just grab some grips and you just slap them on the end. There's actually some cutout or a slot, so to speak, that those grips can fit into when you take when you take the housing apart. There's little slots in the housing that fit over the top of the new grips. Now, when you go to the throttle side, what we found is that we have a gear in there. And I'm not as much, I don't have as much knowledge on the Harleys, but I do know that a lot of the newer ones have a little gear drive that that is on the inside of the grip. What do we got there? Oh, oh boy, we got the big uns out. The big dogs.
Yeah, this is Dora close to me and Lucy behind.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Are they getting a treat or what?
Aaron's teasing them so that they'll stay here where they are. And there we go.
Oh yeah. Handsome.
They're so good.
Handsome and pretty.
Yep. Bye, girls.
Bye, girls. Anyway, so on the throttle side of the Harley grips, if you look down deep inside the grips, you'll see a gear or a reverse gear on the inside. And when you slide those on, there's a gear on the end of the bars for the Harleys, and that has to be working right so you can get your little throttle working there. And so that's probably why they probably bought the wrong grips. So that's to answer that question. Probably go on and on about it.
Yeah, the
Dusty
main
Pine,
thing is
even simple Harleys. Here we go. Let's see what Dusty has to say. The Mr. Harley down there, down south.
Yeah, he's right.
Yeah, there are a lot of aftermarket parts that just don't work very well, and sometimes you gotta engineer it yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big disappointments of eBay for me is the idea that now the advertisers have gotten to the point where they say fits whatever.
Everything fits. Everything fits.
Yeah, no matter what, and it doesn't. And you have to be very careful about buying what you consider something. Hey, that's a great deal, and it looks really good. And if it actually worked, it probably would be good, but they don't actually work, and then it's a waste of money. So
that's right.
Sure you get the right stuff.
Okay, last question of the day. I didn't see any questions in the comments, so that's cool. We'll keep moving on here. Number 5, how much should a carb cleaning with kits cost? So it depends on how many carbs. So if you're talking 4 carbs, your typical cost is going to be anywhere from $350 to $600, depending on what bike it is and what carbs they are. But if you want to just talk in general, like CB750 or something like that, you're talking about $400 with kits. It could be upwards to $600 to $800 if we're talking, a big V65 or like the V Max. Those are a little cumbersome to get off in the first place. And of course, you add labor if you have to take them off and put them on the bike. And you can talk about after they're already on the bike.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this, and most of the professional mechanics that I know feel this way. You might be able to take something apart, but it in no way means that you would be comfortable putting it back together, even if it was properly adjusted when they gave it to you. It's not going to be custom tailored to your bike. So the chances are pretty good that if you can't do the rebuild yourself, you don't have the facilities or the experience, you're probably not going to have a good experience when you try to put them back on and get them to work. And it might even be dangerous because you've got to make sure the cables are on correctly. You've got to make sure that you don't have anything hanging things up, or most bikes have interferences to other parts of the motorcycle and you can hose that up. So just, don't get into a false economy that you think just because you can take it apart that you can put it back together and the carbs will be repaired. The other thing is, and Steve and I have found this to be true hundreds and hundreds of times, an awful lot of people want to lay the responsibility for something that doesn't work right on their bike to the carburation. And many times they're right, but it's not always that. And it can be two or three things conspiring to be an issue.
Well, we've had several times where someone will bring us the carbs and we'll go through them and it'll be done correctly, 99% of the time. And they put it on the bike and they're wondering why their bike doesn't work. Well, there's, 10 other reasons why it may not be the carburetors. A lot of it can be due to electrical.
Yeah, but the other thing to consider is that carburetors are only one part of a fuel system. You've got a gas tank, a gas cap, a petcock, or some sort of feed lines. All of that stuff contributes to what's going on inside the carburetor. And if they're not right, they're not going to work.
Right. Hey, Matt, how you doing? So Matt just asked the question, if you could recommend only one upgrade for performance, what would you recommend? And I'm going to guess what you're going to say real quick. Okay. I'm going to guess you're going to say suspension.
I'm going to break it into two
top three.
I'll break it into two simple parts. If I could recommend only one upgrade for performance, I would say become a better rider. Take a riding class, do a track day, and that presumes that your bike's in pretty good shape and does what it's supposed to be doing. And
let's
the other
presume
thing,
you're a good rider.
Oh, you mean like, what am I going to do?
Let's presume you're already a decent rider. What upgrade to your bike would you recommend?
I'm going to say, you're right. I'm going to say suspension, because so many bikes have suspension that either isn't optimized for the rider itself or isn't correct. But I would say the other thing that we find more often than not is one main thing that seems to transform virtually every bike we work on is new tires.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
If you don't have a really good set of pretty fresh tires on your motorcycle, you're not going to get the performance out of it you want. But I think Matt's also kind of sticking his toe in the water of how do I make it faster or, stronger or whatever. Unfortunately, there's just no good short answer to that. It's a Rubik's Cube. You can modify virtually any bike out there. There's a guy who gets great reviews for the old Airhead BMWs. His name's John Jemmy, and he puts an ECU item, a little solid state device inside the ECU for BMWs of that vintage that have fuel injection. And it does make them better, but it also compromises a lot of things. So if I would say if you have a modern bike that's fuel injected and you're looking to, maybe tailor the performance rather than make it significantly better, that's a tough thing to do, to make it significantly better. But if you're looking to tailor it, the mixture things like power commanders are pretty neat adds. Mm-hmm. By comparison, if your bike's in good shape, they can be adjusted to your preference. And if you put a pipe on it or a different air filter, you can adjust it that way. But sticking your toe in the water in any kind of modification is just the beginning of a long journey until you get what you want.
And if you do modify a bike with, say, intake and exhaust, then you've got to get it rejetted or put a power commander in it if it's a newer a newer vehicle.
Yeah, this is just a commercial after riding for, almost 60 years. If you don't like the performance of your bike, maybe you need a different bike. There's something that works better, because if it isn't doing what you want it to do, or you don't have multiple bikes for different reasons, I'd say quit beating yourself up and go find something you really do like and use that rather than modify the one you got.
Yeah, don't go down the dragon on a Honda Shadow and wonder why it doesn't perform very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Get you a little bit better turning bike to do.
Yeah, don't get on a Honda Fury and expect to go down the dragon and think that's going to be fun.
Mahoy has a question here. Will thicker, larger diameter grips help with hand cramps while riding?
No, it'll make it worse. When you have bigger, thicker grips, you can't get as much purchase on the grip as you normally would. That's why dirt bikes almost always have little thin grips that your hands can get around with the gloves on. If you're having hand cramps, it's probably because the grips are too big rather than too small.
Or you remember those little grippy things with the spring on it that you make your grip better? Maybe you need to get one of those old school things, Ron.
Just pick up a tennis ball and keep it in the car and squeeze it all the time.
Do a little stretching and some yoga. Add that along to it.
Now, did I hear somebody say that Ron Mahoy has tiny hands? Maybe that's it.
I'm not even going there. Next question. I ran out of questions.
Yeah, that's good timing.
All right, it's time for Kim's Essentials. Let's hear what Kim's got to say.
Yeah, so again, I surprised myself that I don't think of what's really essentially important. And I showed this a minute ago.
I need an intro song for your Kim's Essentials.
Yeah, this right here, this is essential. If you don't have a really decent modern helmet, get one. And more specifically with this one, I want to show you something on this helmet that I would have thought was kind of an indulgence before, but I don't think that anymore. It's this little guy. It's this sunshade that pops down.
Oh yeah, it's so handy.
If you don't have
black,
if you don't have one of these, you need one. You may not think you do, but you really do, because you've got so many choices of what you do with the shield. Sometimes when you lock them down, if they're pin lock shields, you just feel a little bit less than comfortable unless you have it open a little bit. But this almost makes it reasonable to ride with the helmet visor up. And it also solves a lot of problems with glasses if you wear them. You try to put in sunglasses when your regular glasses fit in the helmet nicely, but the sunglasses don't. I mean, this solves a lot of issues. So,
well, what's nice about having that shade built in is there's been many times you go down to like the tail of the dragon, and hey, Tim Cadwell, old FedEx driver buddy. You're going down the dragon. It's sunny out, but you're going through trees, and you might be out in the sunlight, and then you can flip your shade down, and then when you hit the trees and you got all the shade stuff going on, you just flip it back, and you're back to a clear visor without having to. There's been times when I've had sunglasses on, and I'm like, oh, I got to take these off, stick them in my pocket, accidentally lose them. It's wonderful to have that built-in shade for sure.
Yeah, it's really good. So. Second essential that I want to share, again, I can't believe I don't go all the way back to
tools today. Okay.
To the basic. Yeah, no tools.
Yeah.
Well, these are tools, but they're different.
Yeah.
So if you don't wear these every time you get on a motorcycle, you should be wearing them.
Will those help Ron Mahoy with his hand cramps?
It could be. It might be that your gloves are too tight. It might be if you're using gloves. It might be that your gloves are too thick, in which case it would make it hard to hold on to it. I mean, if you think about it, if you were holding a baseball bat on the thick end, you can't control anything about that baseball bat. But if you slide your hand down to the thin end, you've got a good grip on it, and you can move your hand around. It's not uncomfortable. But to the essentials part, these are my favorite motorcycle gloves, these particular ones. And these are the least expensive, made in Pakistan leather gloves. They're the kind that you buy at motorcycle meets that cost like $15.
They're the no-name something or others.
But they have a couple. There's a couple things specifically about these that I like, and I'm not giving a commercial for these. I'm saying wear gloves, period. Just wear something that works for you. But these have a Velcro closure on the wrist, and that's kind of good because you can seal up between where your wrist hits the glove, and that takes up air and it quits disrupting what's going on. The other thing about this is it has a palm reinforcement where the throttle is and where the other side as well. So it tends to give you something to rest on with that. But the most important thing about these gloves, and when you're buying motorcycle gloves, this is really important. They're stitched on the outside so that your fingers, when you're on the inside, you can't feel the stitching. So you want to make sure that you buy gloves that are like that. And
I hate when they have the stitching.
The super high-end gloves that you buy that are armored, and they're $200 a pair. They're usually molded, but the finger part of those gloves is usually kangaroo or something really thin. To Ron's question, if you're wearing something that's too thick or interrupts your ability to pronate your fingers like that, then you're going to have cramps. It's just what's going to happen.
There you go. All right. Yeah. Some people have problem with their hand falling asleep because maybe the vibration or maybe the angle that they are on the bike. You'll see a lot of people hanging their hand down and stretching it out and putting it back up.
Yeah. Any of those guys put those cafe bars on their bike are probably going to have hands that fall asleep. That's
true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody. We're gonna shut her down, and we went a little long, but it doesn't matter because it's our show. We can
do greetings from Washington.
We'll probably be doing more questions. So if you're gonna send your questions in, email to mototalk123@gmail.com, or you can DM one of us. Put it in the comments when we post the show is going to come up. And I've got there's no dog there. I've got a tip of the day, and the tip of the day, safety tip of the day is don't crash. That's it.
Yeah. That's
good. All right. We're out of here. Thanks for joining us, Kim, on your vacation. We'll see you when you get back. Everybody have a great day. Ride safe, and we will talk to you later. Hey, Lee, we'll see you later.
Go on.